There is a voice that calls to you through time. Can you hear it? Listen closely. It doesn't shout, it doesn't need to. Its authority comes not from volume, but from age-old truth, whispered through generations, carried in your very blood, encoded in your deepest instincts. It's the voice of your warrior ancestors. They speak to you across centuries, across millennia. Men who stood against impossible odds. Men who protected what was sacred. Men who understood something modern society has attempted to erase from your consciousness. That within every authentic man breathes a warrior's spirit, awaiting recognition, awaiting reclamation, awaiting resurrection. This isn't a metaphor. Not a comfortable analogy, not some poetic flourish designed to temporarily inspire before returning to the neutered existence modern culture has prepared for you. This is primal truth, bone-deep reality, the kind that resonates not in your social media feed or your workplace identity, but in the ancient chambers of your soul where your ancestors still stand watch, waiting to see if you'll claim what they've preserved for you through blood and fire and unimaginable sacrifice. Your warrior inheritance. Look around you. Take a cold, hard assessment of what you see. Legions of modern men wandering through existence like ghosts haunting their own potential, drifting through days without purpose, without fire, without the raw, untamed potency their ancestors wielded as naturally as breathing. These men exist physically, but remain spiritually vacant. Their bodies move through the world while their essential nature lies dormant, unawakened, unclaimed. They bear male anatomy, but have never embodied masculine power. They occupy men's physical space, but have never accessed men's spiritual inheritance. They are biological males who have never become metaphysical men. And in their incomplete development, they sense something profoundly missing, something essential they cannot name, something vital they cannot locate, something fundamental they cannot recover through any modern prescription or contemporary formula. What they've lost, what you may have lost, isn't something modern. It's something ancient. Not something new requiring creation, but something old awaiting reclamation. Not something that must be invented, but something that must be remembered. The warrior's inheritance that connects unbroken through your bloodline to the dawn of human consciousness. This inheritance isn't about violence. That's where modern minds immediately go, revealing how thoroughly they've missed the point, how completely they've conflated the warrior's essence with its occasional expression, how totally they've confused the core with one of its many manifestations. The true warrior inheritance transcends mere combat, extends beyond physical confrontation, encompasses realms of existence most modern minds never enter because they lack the foundational masculine inheritance that makes such territories accessible. What exactly is this inheritance? What precious birthright awaits your reclamation? What ancestral treasure has been preserved for you through countless generations of men who understood its irreplaceable value? First and foremost, unflinching confrontation with reality. Your warrior ancestors didn't have the luxury of comfortable delusion, couldn't afford the indulgence of seeing what they wished to see rather than what actually existed, couldn't survive by substituting pleasant fantasy for harsh truth. They looked reality directly in its often merciless face, saw clearly what stood before them, acknowledged without flinching what actually existed rather than what they might have preferred to encounter. This unflinching confrontation wasn't pessimism, wasn't negative thinking, wasn't some primitive inability to imagine better possibilities. It was the essential foundation that made survival possible, the necessary starting point that enabled effective action, the crucial baseline that separated those who continued their bloodline from those who perished without descendants. Your ancestors didn't confront reality because they lacked imagination. They confronted it because they understood a fundamental truth most modern men have forgotten. You cannot effectively engage with what you refuse to see clearly, cannot successfully navigate what you won't acknowledge accurately, cannot properly address what you insist on mislabeling, misinterpreting, or misunderstanding. This capacity for unflinching confrontation with what is, rather than what you wish existed, forms the bedrock of your warrior inheritance, the essential foundation upon which all other masculine virtues stand, the necessary starting point without which no effective action remains possible. Modern society actively discourages this inheritance, rewards comfortable delusion over uncomfortable truth, celebrates pleasant fantasy over harsh reality, promotes soothing falsehood over painful fact. Reclaiming this first inheritance requires courage, demands fortitude, necessitates the spiritual strength to stand unflinching before truth that may undermine cherished illusions or comfortable beliefs. But without this reclamation, all other aspects of your warrior inheritance remain inaccessible. All other dimensions of your masculine birthright remain beyond reach. The second inheritance, decisiveness amid uncertainty. Your warrior ancestors couldn't afford the luxury of perpetual deliberation, couldn't survive through endless contemplation of possible outcomes, couldn't extend their bloodline by permanently weighing options without commitment to action. They made decisions with incomplete information, committed to paths without guarantees, chose directions without certainty of outcome. This decisive action wasn't recklessness, wasn't thoughtless impulse, wasn't primitive inability to consider consequences. It was the necessary implementation that transformed assessment into impact, the essential conversion that turned perception into effect, the crucial transition that changed understanding into outcome. Your ancestors weren't decisive because they lacked intellectual capacity. They were decisive because they understood another fundamental truth most modern men have forgotten. Perfect information never arrives. Complete certainty never materializes. Absolute guarantee never emerges. Action must occur in the space between knowing enough and knowing everything. Decision must happen in the gap between sufficient understanding and total comprehension. Commitment must manifest in the interval between adequate information and perfect certainty. This capacity for decisive action amid inevitable uncertainty forms the second level of your warrior inheritance, the essential implementation mechanism that converts perception into impact, the necessary bridge that transforms what you see into what you create. Modern society actively undermines this inheritance, promotes perpetual analysis over committed action, encourages endless deliberation over decisive implementation, rewards thorough contemplation over resolute execution. Reclaiming this second inheritance requires courage of a different kind, demands the spiritual strength to act without certainty, necessitates the masculine power to move forward without guarantee, to commit without assurance, to choose without confirmation of outcome. But without this reclamation, Your warrior inheritance remains theoretical rather than practical, academic rather than implemented, conceptual rather than manifested in the physical world. Your ancestors mastered through this very capacity for decisive action amid inevitable uncertainty. The third inheritance, uncompromising responsibility. Your warrior ancestors couldn't indulge in the luxury of blame displacement, couldn't survive through attribution of outcomes to forces beyond their control, couldn't extend their bloodline by locating responsibility anywhere except squarely upon their own shoulders. They owned results completely, accepted consequences absolutely, acknowledged outcomes as direct products of their choices, their actions, their decisions, their implementations. This ownership wasn't masochism, wasn't self-flagellation, wasn't primitive inability to recognize external factors. It was the necessary mindset that enabled adaptation and growth, the essential perspective that facilitated actual improvement rather than perpetual justification. The crucial orientation that permitted genuine advancement instead of endless rationalization. Your ancestors didn't practice absolute responsibility because they lacked understanding of complex causality. They practiced it because they grasped another fundamental truth most modern men have forgotten. The moment you locate responsibility outside yourself, you surrender the power to create different outcomes. When you attribute results to external forces, you position yourself as helpless object rather than effective agent. When you assign causality to outside influences, you transform yourself from creator to victim. When you place accountability anywhere except upon your own shoulders, you convert yourself from subject to object in the narrative of your own existence. This capacity for uncompromising responsibility forms the third level of your warrior inheritance, the essential orientation that enables continuous growth rather than perpetual stagnation. The necessary mindset that facilitates actual improvement instead of endless justification. Modern society actively sabotages this inheritance, promotes sophisticated blame displacement over complete ownership, encourages complex victimhood narratives over straightforward result acceptance, rewards elaborate justification over simple acknowledgement of personal causality. Reclaiming this third inheritance requires courage of yet another kind, demands the spiritual strength to stand alone with results, necessitates the masculine power to own outcomes without deflection, to accept consequences without dilution, to acknowledge results without diminishment through distribution of causality. But without this reclamation, your capacity for growth remains fundamentally crippled. Your ability to adapt becomes severely handicapped. Your potential for actual improvement, rather than elaborate justification, stays seriously impaired. The fourth inheritance, controlled power. Your warrior ancestors couldn't afford undisciplined strength, couldn't survive through unrestrained force, couldn't extend their bloodline by unleashing unbounded power without precision, purpose, and restraint. They developed substantial capacity for violence while simultaneously building sophisticated containment systems, created significant destructive capability while concurrently establishing complex control mechanisms, generated considerable force potential while simultaneously constructing intricate guidance frameworks. This controlled power wasn't weakness, wasn't limitation, wasn't primitive inability to fully express capacity. It was the necessary balance that converted raw force into effective impact, the essential discipline that transformed crude strength into precise application. The crucial restraint that changed destructive potential into constructive implementation. Your ancestors didn't practice controlled power because they lacked capacity for full expression. They practiced it because they understood another fundamental truth most modern men have forgotten. Uncontrolled strength damages what it seeks to build. Undisciplined power destroys what it intends to create. Unbounded force harms what it means to help. The mature masculine doesn't express less power, but more precisely directed power. Doesn't manifest reduced strength, but more exactly applied strength. Doesn't demonstrate diminished force, but more specifically implemented force. This capacity for controlled power forms the fourth level of your warrior inheritance. The essential discipline that converts raw strength into constructive impact. The necessary restraint that transforms crude force into precise application. Modern society actively distorts this inheritance, either promotes complete power suppression rather than sophisticated power direction, or encourages unbounded expression rather than disciplined application. Either rewards total strength denial rather than developed strength control, or celebrates unlimited force manifestation rather than precisely directed force implementation. Reclaiming this fourth inheritance requires integration rather than selection, demands both power development and control cultivation, necessitates simultaneous strength building and restraint mastery, rather than exclusive focus on either alternative from the false dichotomy modern thinking presents. But without this reclamation, your masculine expression remains either neutered through complete suppression or dangerous through undisciplined manifestation. Your masculine energy stays either totally contained, serving no constructive purpose, or completely unleashed, creating substantial damage rather than beneficial impact. The fifth inheritance, purpose beyond comfort. Your warrior ancestors couldn't survive through comfort prioritization, couldn't extend their bloodline by placing convenience above necessary action, couldn't pass their genes to you by selecting ease over meaningful purpose when the two came into inevitable conflict. They oriented around purposes that frequently demanded substantial discomfort, organized their choices through priorities that often required significant inconvenience, structured their actions through values that regularly necessitated considerable sacrifice of immediate comfort for transcendent meaning. This purpose-driven existence wasn't masochism, wasn't self-punishment, wasn't primitive inability to appreciate comfort. It was the necessary orientation that enabled meaningful contribution rather than mere consumption, the essential priority structure that facilitated significant impact instead of exclusive self-focus, the crucial value framework that permitted legacy creation rather than momentary pleasure maximization. Your ancestors didn't subordinate comfort to purpose because they lacked appreciation for ease. They did it because they grasped another fundamental truth most modern men have forgotten. Comfort makes a satisfying servant, but a destructive master. Convenience provides a valuable tool, but a devastating priority. Ease offers a pleasant means, but a ruinous end. The mature masculine doesn't reject comfort entirely, but places it properly within a hierarchy dominated by purpose. Doesn't deny convenience completely, but positions it accurately within a priority structure governed by meaning. Doesn't abandon ease absolutely, but locates it appropriately within a value framework ruled by significance. This capacity for purpose beyond comfort forms the fifth level of your warrior inheritance, the essential orientation that enables meaningful contribution rather than mere consumption. The necessary priority structure that facilitates significant impact instead of exclusive self-focus. Modern society actively undermines this inheritance, promotes comfort as highest priority, rather than valuable servant to greater purpose, encourages convenience as ultimate consideration rather than useful tool for meaningful ends, rewards ease maximization as primary objective rather than pleasant means towards significant goals. Reclaiming this fifth inheritance requires courage of yet another kind, demands the spiritual strength to voluntarily embrace necessary discomfort in service to meaningful purpose, necessitates the masculine power to willingly accept required inconvenience in pursuit of significant impact. But without this reclamation, your existence remains fundamentally comfortable but ultimately meaningless. Your experience stays essentially convenient but finally empty. Your journey continues basically easy but eventually hollow when measured against the deep human need for significance beyond self-satisfaction. These five inheritances form the core of your warrior birthright, the essential legacy preserved for you through countless generations of men who understood their irreplaceable value. The crucial bequest maintained for you through endless ancestral sacrifices by those who recognize these qualities, not as optional accessories, but as fundamental necessities for meaningful masculine existence. They await your reclamation, not through academic study, but through embodied practice, not through intellectual understanding, but through physical implementation. Not through conceptual appreciation, but through lived expression in the crucible of actual challenge, rather than theoretical consideration. This reclamation isn't easy, won't happen overnight, doesn't unfold through casual engagement or periodic consideration. It requires dedicated practice, committed implementation, regular confrontation with challenges specifically designed to develop these precise capacities through direct engagement rather than distant contemplation. Physical challenge that pushes beyond comfortable boundaries into territory where growth becomes possible precisely because comfort becomes impossible. Mental challenge that extends beyond familiar limitations into domains where development occurs exactly because convenience must be abandoned. Spiritual challenge that expands beyond known frontiers into realms where transformation happens specifically because ease cannot accompany the journey. These challenges aren't punishment, aren't pointless suffering, aren't arbitrary difficulty without purpose. They are the necessary forge that transforms intellectual understanding of your warrior inheritance into embodied expression of its actual qualities. The essential crucible that converts conceptual appreciation into physical manifestation. The crucial process that changes theoretical knowledge into lived experience. Your ancestors understood this transformation process intimately, created elaborate initiation systems specifically designed to facilitate it, developed sophisticated rite of passage frameworks precisely constructed to enable it. These systems have largely vanished from modern society, been dismantled through progressive elimination of structured masculine initiation, been abandoned through gradual erosion of formalized male rite of passage frameworks. But the need for them remains. The necessity for transformation from biological male to initiated man continues unabated regardless of cultural trend or social fashion. The requirement for conversion from physical boy to spiritual warrior proceeds uninterrupted despite contemporary discomfort with this essential metamorphosis. In the absence of formal systems, you must create your own. Design your personal initiation path. Construct your individual transformation journey. Build your unique development process focused specifically on reclaiming your warrior inheritance through direct engagement with challenges that forge intellectual understanding into embodied expression. This self-initiated transformation won't receive social celebration, won't attract cultural appreciation, won't generate mainstream recognition or conventional acknowledgement. It unfolds in quieter spaces, manifests in more private domains, occurs in less visible territories, where dedication to ancestral reclamation proceeds without requirement for external validation or societal approval. But in this reclamation process, something remarkable occurs, something profound manifests. Something extraordinary emerges for those committed to the journey regardless of its lack of contemporary endorsement or modern sanction. The forgotten connection with your warrior ancestors reestablishes. The dormant link with your masculine lineage reactivates. The severed bond with your primal inheritance reconnects through dedicated practice rather than intellectual consideration, through committed implementation rather than conceptual appreciation. And in this reconnection, this reactivation, this reestablishment, you experience something beyond description to those who haven't undertaken the journey themselves, beyond explanation to those who haven't committed to the process personally, beyond articulation to those who haven't dedicated themselves to this reclamation directly. You experience the indescribable recognition of becoming what you were always meant to become, the inexplicable remembrance of ancestral connection beyond simple genetic transmission, the inexpressible realization of spiritual continuity with men who came before you, who preserved these qualities specifically for your reclamation, who maintained these capacities precisely for your inheritance. This experience isn't mystical nonsense, isn't esoteric fantasy, isn't primitive superstition dressed as spiritual insight. It's the very real, thoroughly tangible, completely concrete experience of fulfilling your masculine design specifications, of manifesting your intended operational parameters, of functioning as you were constructed to function by both natural selection and cultural development across countless generations of men who understood what modern society has attempted to erase from consciousness itself, that within every authentic man breathes a warrior spirit, that inside every genuine male exists a primal force, that at the core of every true masculine heart beats the inheritance of ancestors who preserved these essential qualities, not for extinction, but for expression, not for elimination, but for embodiment, not for erasure, but for empowerment of those who would reclaim what rightfully belongs to them by both blood and spirit. Your warrior inheritance awaits, not in comfortable contemplation, but in committed reclamation, not in theoretical consideration, but in practical implementation, not in intellectual appreciation, but in embodied expression through dedicated practice, specifically focused on developing these precise qualities, regardless of contemporary comfort with their existence or modern approval of their manifestation. The only question remaining is whether you'll claim what already belongs to you, whether you'll reclaim what patiently awaits your recognition. Whether you'll reconnect with what has never departed but merely fallen silent while waiting for your awakening to its perpetual presence. Your ancestors are watching, not as distant judges but as invested stakeholders in your personal manifestation of qualities they sacrificed everything to preserve specifically for your inheritance, your embodiment, your expression in a world that desperately needs exactly what they maintained for you through blood and fire, an unimaginable commitment to continuation of what they recognized as essential rather than optional. The warrior spirit doesn't require your belief to exist, only your reclamation to manifest, only your recognition to activate, only your commitment to express through the physical vehicle temporarily entrusted to your stewardship during your brief journey through this testing ground, for qualities preserved across millennia specifically for implementation rather than intellectualization. Claim your inheritance, express your birthright, manifest your legacy through dedicated practice rather than distant consideration. Your ancestors await your answer, not in words but in action, not in declaration but in demonstration, not in comfortable assertion but in committed implementation of the warrior inheritance that has always belonged to you by both blood and spirit, awaiting only your courageous reclamation of what was never truly lost, but merely forgotten in the comfortable amnesia of a society that mistakes spiritual slumber for enlightened evolution. Awaken, reclaim, become what you were always meant to become.